Well, gentlemen, why don't we begin by you giving us an overview of Triad, what it's all about?
Sure. How about I take that one first for
Okay.
us, and then so Triad, Northern Kentucky Triad. We're an economic development company. We've been around for more than 30 years. Quite actually, an innovative company when we were first created in the late 80s. In that it was one of the first regional economic development companies in the country. One of the first to really be endowed with an independent source of revenue that allowed us to operate over this time span. But you know, I view our company as really having two major purposes. One, we're a professional services company that helps companies grow in Northern Kentucky and helps new companies locate in Northern Kentucky by navigating the very complicated and risky location decision-making process. And then we're a strategy company, and inside of the strategy piece of it, what we do is we take the work we do with companies in location decision, and we help our communities understand what does progress and prosperity look like, what types of decisions should we try to make as a community so that we can ensure we have ongoing prosperity and success. And just real quick, Doug, I'll share with you, we actually redefined our vision and our purpose last year. And we really love those and have been trying to articulate them. But as of the start of this year, we're saying our vision is to provide opportunity and prosperity for all of Northern Kentuckians. And the purpose that we're doing is to serve Northern Kentucky community so that we thrive through the creation of good jobs from both existing and new companies. So in as much of a nutshell as I can put it, that's who Northern Kentucky Triad is.
That's a great vision statement. That must be one of the best I've heard. Now, our subject today is how Triad has responded to the pandemic challenge, and indeed, not just a health challenge, but of course, a tremendous economic challenge all over the country. Why don't you tell us about the strategy you fashioned in response to COVID-19 and how you came up with it in a nutshell?
Yeah. So again, I'll start, and Bob, and ask you to come
Okay.
in and bring some context there. So when you talk about strategy, it's really more like strategies that we developed. And it was funny getting ready for this. So much has happened over the last year, and you forget about so much that you did because things they were so different and they moved so fast. But we actually created 3 unique strategies as a result of COVID. It started last year on March 13th. And, you know, at that time, the world, we thought this was going to be a really kind of a short-term thing. And so we said, we're going to go into a process called Safe, Serve, Sharpen, and Share. That process lasted all of 1 week. And we realized that COVID was going to be a lot bigger and have a more sustained impact than what we thought. So we pivoted very quickly on March 20th to a program we called Listen, Connect, and Share, which was really trying to dig in on what this sustained effect of COVID was going to be. And then and this really relates a lot to the process that we went through the rest of the year through today. On April 4th, we pivoted and started talking about our new focus is meaningful work. And how do we leverage our company in the face of these unknown circumstances to create meaningful work for our community, or really do meaningful work for the community.
So Doug, I'm going to offer a little context about where we were right at about the time COVID hit back in March of 2020. So Lee mentioned that the company's been around for 30 years. And in that time, you see behind Lee the 3 counties that the Tri-County Economic Development Company served, Boone, Kenton, and Campbell counties, the 3 northernmost counties in Kentucky. And for 30 years, the organization was led by a board that was mostly elected officials, government people, a lot of ex officio board members, and the leadership team of the board was the 3 top political leaders. We call them the judge executives here in Kentucky. They were the board with 1 or 2 private sector individuals. The organization, we like to say we blew it up 2 years ago when the private sector was clamoring for more involvement in Triad and was hoping to get even greater outcomes. The company was very successful. but there was just a feeling that it could be so much more. And so here we are. We knew when we hired Lee in April 2019, we knew that it was going to take a little bit of time to rebuild the organization and literally rebuild the entire staff. There was only one legacy employee from the previous company, and so in the course of 1 year, we hired Lee. He built an incredible team. We have people now on this team that are highly sought after for their expertise, and we're very fortunate to have landed them. In that same time, we reconstituted our board. There's many more private sector individuals on the board than there was before, and our executive committee is now more heavily weighted towards the private sector. And I was asked to be the first private sector chair of the board, which was quite a departure from what had taken place before. So here we are 1 year after we hired Lee, and we spent a year rebuilding the company, looking at governance structures, looking at committee structures, looking at ways to really have an engaged board. And we were looking at 2020 as the year that we really launched into heavy strategy, profound initiatives and the like. And then all of a sudden, wham, right in our face comes COVID. And it was like, oh my gosh, all of our best intentions now are going to be put on hold, and we're going to be in crisis mode for the foreseeable future. So that was quite a departure from where we felt. We had a lot of energy coming into 2020, and quite frankly, I think it was the success we had that first year in rebuilding the company and getting a very active, engaged board that enabled us to take on what it is we did when COVID did hit.
Yeah. Bob, you bring up great points there. The board was really 2 years. So I was 1 year into the arc of that kind of prequel. The board was 2 years into that from the pushing restart. And I think back to January of last year, we had the board meeting where we really launched that strategy for 2020. And Doug, we have a saying here in the company, we talk about, we say, here we go a lot, here we go. And we're at that here we go moment where we had built this company. We were all together, we had a strategy, and we were ready to move forward. In February, we made the final, probably the third week of February, we made the final hire of that rebuilding process. And I mean, we were right there ready to leap into that when all of a sudden this disruption came. And I think it's important to note that, because as we had to make decisions through this process, one of those decisions was, do we have to dismantle this thing that we've just built? And that hit on a lot of notes. One, because you'd just done all this work. But as Bob talked about, we'd hired this great team of people that had relocated with their families to this community. And you think, are we going to have to take this team apart? And what's the effect of that going to be on not just our ability to operate, but the human beings that make up the company? So, when I look back to where we were sitting, probably on about probably about March 20th of last year, it was a really unique spot from where we started the beginning of the year, and definitely a unique spot from where we stand today.
So tell me how you made the decision. Tell me some of the backstory. Suddenly you're faced with this tremendous crisis. All of your plans now obviously are put on hold. Your one possible decision was close down, circle the wagons, wait for the storm to pass. You decided not to. How did you arrive at that decision to keep going?
Bob, if you'll talk about from the board perspective, I know we're talking about today the CEO and the board chair relationship leading through this. I know from my perspective, one of the things that paid the greatest dividend was, as Bob mentioned, I was hired in March of 2019 and started in April of 2019. So just 1 year before this hit, my very first meeting before ever even, signing on as an employee was coming down and meeting with Bob. And, I can recall walking into his office there at KLH with an outline of what my agenda was going to be for rebuilding the company. And it was kind of a sweaty moment as a new CEO, because you know you need that alignment with your board chair. You know, what if he or she has a different vision? What if she or he has a different way they want to operate things? And so Bob and I started building that relationship and that foundation right then from that moment. Now, I would say very fortunately, we were just blessed, I think, with a lot of very common viewpoints on what the company should look like and what that relationship would be. So it's not like we ever had to overcome a lot of obstacles, but we were able to really build that foundation of relationship and trust and communication that served us well going into the crisis mode. So I can tell you, from my chair, that was hugely important, knowing that I could pick up the phone at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night and call Bob and say, oh my God, we just hit something, in the middle of the night, and we're going to need to figure this out real fast. And knowing you could rely on that was hugely important. Bob, I'll let you jump in there and talk about from your perspective as the board chair, or even from what the board was thinking, I think would be interesting.
Yeah. So one of the challenges, and Doug, you mentioned that, shutting it down was absolutely an option. Well, we had two members of our executive committee who, one is in the convention visitors space industry, but which went to absolute zero. And the other owns 200 hotels, and they went to zero as well for a time there. And they were bringing their perspective, which was, listen, we're living examples of the criticality of this pandemic and what's happening with it. And we absolutely do need to look at shutting this down. How much economic development is going to take place during this crisis, when most people are shutting their businesses down because of mandates from the governors or the federal level. And so, those were real discussions. I mean, they were very, very real discussions. And then, we had one particular elected official who, was all of a sudden very interested in our budget and what austerity measures we were going to take, because they themselves had made some moves in their particular jurisdictions to, cut staff, reduce salaries, go to shorten work weeks, all kinds of different strategies. And they suddenly were very interested in what Triad as an organization was going to do. And that's when, and Lee can give you some details on this, but that's when we made the pivot. And it was, we are not shutting this company down. Now is when businesses need us more than ever. We know that a great deal of economic development comes from within your existing businesses. And so, Lee and his team put together some very specific strategies to serve our companies while they were in crisis.
Now tell us about those strategies. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of it. So
okay. Lee?
You dramatically rethought what you're going to be doing. So tell us about that rethinking.
Yeah, so when we talked about that March 20th, we kicked off that listen, connect, share part, which was really was an intermediate strategy. And we started doing things that we had not done in the past. And what we recognize working with our partners in the community, we have the Chamber of Northern Kentucky. I point because they're in the building over here. So, especially with the Chamber, we realized one of the things that our community needed most was just information. People were, there's a fear that gets created when you don't know. And so the Chamber and partners that we have, we did a tremendous amount of work to get information out the door. One of the things that we did was we created a webinar series on what the CARES Act was going to be. We brought in local partners from the accounting and the legal and the HR world. We were literally broadcasting the first CARES Act webinar when the CARES Act was signed last year. And so, clients were asking questions about legislation that the ink was barely dry on, and we were on air. We ended up serving, I think it was something like 400 local businesses via those webinars. So just, again, a space that we hadn't been in. And we talked about on April 4th when we went to that meaningful work thing. The decision for us, Doug, so I'll tell you the work we did, but the decision really was, what's the right thing to do? If we were a for-profit company, and Bob mentioned our board members, you shut it down, right? Your fiscal response, your fiduciary responsibility to the shareholder, you've shut it down, you conserve. You know, as a nonprofit organization, you think about, well, our mission is to serve. It's not to think of ourselves. It's to go out and help the community. And then you have that human aspect of it, of our people, in making sure our people are okay. And what we really decided on April 4th was we were going to just focus on the nonprofit mission and go out and serve. And I kind of had this vision in my mind. We were standing on high ground and we were safe at that time as a company. We had money, we had a company, we had resources, but we knew our community was kind of in the thick. And we just decided we were going to wade in and help. And the trusting thing that we trusted, especially from Bob and our board, was if and when it comes a time that we need help, we run out of financial resources or some other obstacle, we knew our board was going to come get us and help us, and help us be sustainable. And so that knowing that we had that backing really allowed us to take that risk of leveraging the company, using financial reserves to go out and do work. And so what we started to do is we do business retention work on a daily basis, but we put a massive focus on business retention. You know, through that early part of that meaningful work stage, we did over 1,000 touch points with local businesses. In a given year, we're looking to do about 180 meetings with businesses. We had 1,000 touch points early on, and that was calls, that was emails, that was meetings. And it was all about disseminating information. Here's where you can get PPP. Here's where you can get hand sanitizer. Here's what the CARES Act means. Here's an accountant. Here's just making connectivity. 173 of those were actual in-person client meetings. We were able to pull data out of that, share that data via social media, but we also culminated that in what we called some CEO roundtables. We had never done those before. We ended up bringing 40 CEOs together virtually to share that information and understand, importantly, again, talking about that strategy thing we do for the community, what is it that they need in support from the communities? And then the final thing that we really did is, because we kind of found ourselves in this middle road of clearinghouse for information, we ended up helping multiple communities do business relief grants. We helped the city of Fort Mitchell. We helped the city of Independence. Combined, they got out over $300,000 of CARES Act to local businesses. And then again, we worked with the chamber and some other local organizations on a restaurant relief program. They got over $200,000 of spend and relief to local restaurants. All things that we weren't doing as of March 13th of last year. So, Bob, a little bit long-winded on my part. I apologize. I get a little fired up when I kind of look back at what we did last year and recalling the work.
Well, Doug, one of the big pivots there was, Triad's focus for 30 years was primary industries. And so typically that evokes larger scale companies. And when you think about it, suddenly now we're handing out grants to restaurants and bars, right, who've been impacted. I mean, it's really was a shift in our focus. But we knew that, in partnership with the chamber and some other entities, that we needed to be part of that, part of that effort. Something we haven't touched on is when you talk about the criticality of the decision making that had to take place. Little background. So Triad is funded, over 95% of our funding comes from a tax on rental cars. And so as you can imagine, when the aviation industry went to darn near zero, all of a sudden we were really sweating bullets. And suddenly there were metrics there's lots of metrics we track in this company, but the one that we really started to focus on were number of passengers going through TSA screening. That became the key metric that we've been looking at for the last year, and we've been analyzing that data and trying to correlate it to so many different things. So when we realized then that, listen, we're going to be operating on reserves for quite some time, and we had just, as I mentioned, we had just gone through a whole new governance structure where we had some minimum cash balances that we said we must always maintain. And suddenly now we're doing projections that says we're going to challenge that. We could be hitting that minimum at some point in this crisis. All of a sudden the reality hits you, right? And And then there's also a delay also in the when we receive those revenues from the rental car tax. So yeah, there was some real shifting. The other, another thing, this might seem fairly insignificant, but it actually was incredibly important. We, as a board, reviewed the company's financials on a quarterly basis, and that included the executive committee. We went to a monthly dashboard. We went from a monthly review, and the staff was fantastic in creating us a dashboard of the key metrics that really helped to synthesize the important stuff down to a few key slides on that dashboard. It helped us to manage through the crisis, we being the board, and our executive committee in particular. So I know that the broader board, the overall board, was very appreciative of the fact that our executive committee was keeping our finger on the pulse of the company on a very regular basis, much more frequently than our board met. And that was important to our board. And fortunately, we have seen a rebound in passenger screenings, and our revenue is crept back up nicely. We're still, we have the CEO of our airport on our board, and she constantly gives us the reality check that they're talking about late 2023 before air travel gets back to where it was. So we know we're not out of the woods by any stretch, but we're seeing some incremental improvement there.
Is there any? Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me I want to give Bob credit for a decision that actually we didn't make. But I'll put some numbers around what Bob was just talking about. We entered 2020 with the aspiration of being north of a $3 million company. That was kind of where we were headed with where we wanted to go. We created reams of data in a very short period of time on what we thought financial projections were going to be. It was easy just to zero out the revenue, right? And the question was then how long would it stay zeroed out? And we calculated we needed at least $1.8 million to throw everything overboard except the rent, the lights, and the people, enough to give us the capability to execute on the mission. No travel, reduced benefits, no training and education, no water, whatever it was that we needed. But the key decision that was made there, and I think it has served us well even to this day, was we know what we know right now, and let's make a decision on that. And we don't have to solve the entire COVID puzzle today. And as Bob talked about, the board started looking at financials monthly. Okay, here's what we know April 1st. Here's what we know May 1st. And we just kept making decisions as we went forward. Fortunately, through that arc, the data kept getting better each month. Revenue kept getting a little better. The work kept coming in and kept getting better. And it allowed us to keep this thing on track. But I look back and I think, well, one of the most important decisions was really a non-decision to make some big sweeping change at any point through that early arc, and that came from Bob and the board.
Is there any point during this excruciating year when you did seriously consider closing down, or did you just stick with the strategy and it was never challenged?
I would say that
seriously,
we never got there. I think the work that was being done was viewed as being very meaningful and important to our region. Lee made the comment that if he had a great deal of confidence that if we had exhausted all of our reserves, that our board was committed to the organization, and that in all likelihood the board would step up and find a way to finance the organization long term, or in the short term rather, to keep it afloat. But we never got there. I think that once the decision was made, we're pivoting and we're going to serve, we were committed to it. We didn't see any other way but to stay committed to it.
Yeah.
So, gentlemen, what have you learned through this this challenging period about crisis management, crisis leadership? What are some of the lessons that
Well, Bob, I'll let you answer that first. The question is, how long do you have, Doug? We could probably fill hours with what have you learned through this?
Right. So Doug, one of the, I mentioned that I came in here as the first private sector chair of the organization. And I knew that it would take a year or so to build the organization back. But then I was very hopeful that, my legacy is that first chair was going to be that we undertook some very bold initiatives. And, one of those is to reactivate our port authority and make it a meaningful economic development tool. And then another was, we were on the brink of signing an MOU with Catalytic Fund, which is a organization that helps the capital stack, manage the capital stack for developers to do meaningful redevelopment in our river cities. We were right on the brink of taking both of those on, and quite frankly, there were a lot of people close to me who were saying, you know what, if you accomplish that, if you accomplish getting the organization rebuilt, and you accomplish those two initiatives in your term as the chair, holy mackerel, you will have left a legacy. Well, suddenly all of those two key initiatives were put on hold. And the lesson learned there is, we're now, as we're climbing out of this, we're now taking those two projects on to keep them going. And I guess one of the lessons is it's not about saying no, never. It's just about deciding that it wasn't the right time at that point. It was now was the wrong time. It's just going to have to go on hold. We will get back to it. It's still time. A 12 or 18 month or 24-month delay is not going to diminish the importance of the work, right? We just don't have to be in a hurry to get it done.
Yeah. Yeah. Bob, I look back at that, and as we talked last week, kind of getting ready for this and had some time to think about it, I'll just talk about something I mentioned earlier. To me, what we learned is the importance of that foundation. That you can't wait until a crisis hits to build a foundation of trust with your board, with your community, with your team, with your customers. That's something that you have to do every day, because you're going to draw on it like crazy when crisis happens. There's a blog I like to watch. It's about aviation, and the guy on there always talks about aviate, navigate, communicate. That's the order of things. And I think we did that, right? We just kept operating the company forward. We kept navigating, trying to find our way with data, and we communicated like crazy as we went through that. And then again, I mentioned before, I think the final thing that we did really well is we only made decisions when we needed to make decisions, and we didn't pre-make a decision for the entire COVID period. We made a decision for the month, we made a decision for the quarter, and then we aviated, navigated, and communicated to the end of that quarter. And then we kept doing that until today. So I pull those three things out of this.
So gentlemen, you successfully launched a number of services in your region, a number of initiatives, keep businesses going, sectors you hadn't even been very involved with, hospitality industry, restaurants, and so on. And it worked. You survived. We're coming back to normal. Well, knock on wood, but we seem to be coming back to normal. So, and this is my final question, though I welcome any observations you'd like to make. How has facing this crisis changed Triad? How is Triad now going forward a different company from the one that existed in March 2020? We haven't talked about this question, so it might catch you a little off guard, but.
Doug, another initiative that I did mention before, along with our port and the Catalytic Fund, was we were about to go out for an investor campaign. We had done some groundwork. We had talked to consultants already about doing an investor campaign, and that was going to be another part of that 2-year legacy of my chairmanship. And obviously, you don't go out and do an investor campaign in the middle of a pandemic when people are, losing their jobs and cutting their staff and what have you. So now, quite frankly, our investor campaign, which we're in the very early feasibility stages of right now, I feel really good about going out with the message that we didn't turn our backs on the community during this crisis, that we actually did meaningful work. In the course of all this, something that hasn't been mentioned was, one of our challenges in this region is available good land for development. And while we, at the same time that we were shifting gears and pivoting to helping some of those industries that we previously had not served, we were also keeping our eye on the economic development work at hand. And so the company did a very impressive land use study that was then delivered to our community in the midst of this whole pandemic to say, listen, there's no reason why we can't be thinking strategically about our land use right now. And the work of economic development never stopped. It never did stop. I mean, there was still business retention efforts being made. There were certainly expansion, helping companies with expansions. There was certainly outreach to, not the same kind of outreach to site selectors as there was before, very limited in person. But nonetheless, there was still a lot of communication with site selectors at the same time. So to put out this really profound land use study and deliver it to the community in the midst of all this was a tremendous accomplishment. It really was.
How do you? Yes,
sorry,
Lee.
Doug. Bob, I appreciate that. We did spend a ton of time on that. And, I think about that question when we talked about the foundation. We built a ton of foundation in 2019. If we've been hurt in any way over the last year, it's just that all that work going on pause and not being able to, even though we were doing good work in the community, not being able to get and sit across the table from people and continue to build relationship. I really think we're going to have to figure out a way to climb out of that this year by being out of the office a lot when we can, getting back in front of community leaders that we haven't been able to get in front of. I do think one of the unintended benefits that we got, especially internally, is I think the team is highly committed to the mission that we talked about earlier. When you come into our office, there's a passion for what we do now. And I think the team, we didn't have to talk about it. The team knew there were potential difficult decisions out there. We never had to make those. I think the team knew that we were going to do everything we could to save everybody that we could. And you feel that passion in the office and the dedication to that we could hand off a project like land use to somebody who hadn't done that before and say, hey, we need a great result out of this. This can't be B quality work. And you see the return on that every day in here. It's really pretty exciting to come in the office now that we've got people back in here.
In what way do you think Triad has become a more capable company from dealing with the pandemic over the past year?
I'll speak from the board standpoint. Doug, I've witnessed it with my own leadership team here at KLH Engineers, but it's also very true about our board and our executive committee. We have more professional contention in our boardroom than we have ever had before. It was just, we wanted really deep board engagement with our newly formed board. And this crisis has really opened the door for that. I mean, everybody was wanting to contribute to help in a crisis. And the thing is there was no precedent to go by, right? And so with every suggestion for course of action, there was somebody who challenged it. And we are a much better organization for having been through this crisis together because of that professional contention that now exists in our boardroom. It's really a big positive that has come out of this.
Fascinating. Lee, any?
Yeah, Doug, when I think about that, we talked about, we built this company in 2019, and kind of halfway along that arc, I was doing an interview and somebody asked me about the culture of Triad. And I kind of jokingly said, well, we don't really have a culture because everything's so new. Everybody's so new. We know what we want to be, but it's just a work in progress. And I think where we're more capable today, and I've talked a little bit about this, is there's that culture inside of the cohesiveness of the team. And, you know, hopefully this isn't too old a reference for your crowd, but it's like the Harlem Globetrotters, right? It looks like chaos, but there's this synchronicity and teamwork with the ball getting handed off and somebody going to the basket and a perfect pass, and then this guy coming over to play defense or that person coming over. The team has really meshed and can operate at a high level like that. And again, at the beginning, I mentioned our mission and our purpose. We are, you know, we know those today. We can articulate those today in a way we could not do a year ago. And I think all of that allows us to operate at a really high level for our community and for our clients.
In a sense, adversity has turned you into a more cohesive governing team, you might say, both board and the you and your top executives lead.
Yeah, agreed. Definitely agree.
And diversity builds character. And you're much stronger for having gone through it. Well, I want to thank you, fellows, Bob and Lee, for telling us about the Triad story. I know you're really busy. We'll have to circle back in a few months and revisit you and see where you are. I'm sure you'll be thriving. Any closing comments before we
I'll let Lee have the last word.
say farewell?
So I'll take the second last. Doug, it's a pleasure to talk to you. It was a great conversation. It actually provided us an opportunity for some retrospective, which leads to introspection. So thank you for that opportunity.
Oh, thank you, gentlemen. I know you're very busy and I appreciate your time. Lee?
Yeah, Bob, I would echo that. I really appreciate the opportunity to tell our story. I think for me, I sit where I am today and just feel very thankful that we had the opportunity to do meaningful work and help people in our community through a crisis. Thankful that we had a Bob and a board and a governance structure that was built on a foundation of trust that we could lean on when we needed it. And as I look out into our office here, very thankful that we had a team of really high quality people that you look back and you say it was a pleasure to serve through this with them and have an opportunity to lead this with them. So if I'm feeling anything today, it's just really thankful of where we sit and what we can do going forward.
Well, gentlemen, thanks again for being so generous with your time. I wish you a safe, productive, and richly satisfying week. You take care.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.